We know that virtual coaching has become more competitive than ever. NASM's got you covered with our virtual coaching course. NASM's virtual coaching course provides a complete solution to help you translate your services into a successful virtual platform. This course will give you the tools to build and operate a sustainable virtual business model. The formats may be different, but you're still delivering fitness training and effective behavioral coaching. That doesn't change even if you can't be in the same physical space as your clients. The truth is, this is the way to reach more clients and expand your reach and impact. There's never been a better time to carve out your very own virtual space, and NASM is here to help. Welcome to NASM's virtual coaching.
You are listening to the NASM CPT podcast with Rick Richey, the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Welcome to the NASM CPT podcast. My name is Rick Richey, and today I am joined with a friend of mine, a colleague at the National Academy of Sports Medicine, an educator and a researcher. Wow, that sounds really fun to say. A researcher, Kyle Stoll. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me back. It's great to see you, and I will apologize for me being a little foggy over here. I think it's just a bit of a lighting issue, so my apologies.
Oh man, watching you live on the live stream, it shows how dreamy you are. It's like a dream version. I like it. Yeah. I like it. But for those listening, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So on to the next topic. Welcome, my friend. Tell us a little bit about you, your background, your education, and what is your primary area of research?
Yes, sir. Okay, well, going way back, I was born December 6th, 1980. So currently I am a content development manager for the National Academy of Sports Medicine, and what we do is really kind of oversee the building of certain of our educational courses. A little bit about my background. I've sort of been on the education side of the fitness industry for probably the past decade. This has been, teaching at a university, working for NASM, and educating for a couple of different organizations. As far as education goes, I do a doctoral in sciences, a licensed therapist, and did a master's in rehabilitation. And on the research side of things, I worked for a company that made foam rollers for 6 or 8 years, something like that. And so that sort of led me into the research side of things, being focused on foam rolling. So I'm very fortunate to work with an excellent, what I would say is a true researcher, Dr. Scott Cheatham. So he's sort of been my research mentor, and we've worked together to publish, I would say 10 to 12 studies, I think, at this point. Most of them on foam rolling. We have done a couple of systematic reviews on wearable technology and also hip pathology. So that is me.
All right. Well, I think we've had your research partner on here probably 4 times. So yeah. Scott Cheatham has been a guest. He's been a contributor to the show. And we're looking forward to the next time we can get him back on. So we're a big fan of Scott. And the last time you were on, we got a lot of feedback from it, primarily because the topic. And the topic is on foam rolling. And people are interested in what this is. I tell people all the time, when I first started, the only people that were foam rolling in 2002, when I got my certification, started working as a trainer, were people that were NASM certified. There was nobody else doing it. You walk in the gym, see somebody foam rolling, and you're like, that guy is certified through NASM. And at that point, certainly not even a fraction of the people who were NASM certified were even foam rolling. So it wasn't a thing that people really did. Now it has really evolved, and it's evolved from these kind of foam logs that people were using to all sorts of different constructs and different materials and different skins on it and different textures. Is there any difference between utilizing these flat, these round, completely cylindrical foam rollers, and then all the other ones that have the designs and the bumps and the knobs and the stripes? Is there a difference in what happens based on the texture?
There is, yeah. I think it was 2018. It may have been the earlier part of 2019. We published a study on different textures, and we found that really any sort of roller or any sort of compression to the tissue is going to be beneficial. It's going to help increase fluid flow. It's going to move the tissues around. It's going to work well. But we found that rollers with a texture, and it doesn't matter what type of texture, any type of texture seem to give you a little bit better result. And this was, we measure two things quite frequently: range of motion, which is a pretty normal thing, but then also pain pressure threshold. What we wanted to see is if the rollers can influence the perception of pain. And we find that some sort of a texture, it appears to, sort of the theory behind it, it's moving the tissues a bit more. So it may sort of stimulate the tissues a little bit differently. It may move the tissues around a bit more, and that makes it slightly more effective.
Well, is that your mind, by the way?
It's our dog, yes.
That's all right. If I have a UPS guy come into the door, this podcast is over. My dog's going to completely lose his mind. So there's a difference in texture. There's a difference in what's happening, perhaps moving the fluids within the tissue. What else does it do? Like, just regarding foam rolling. So you mentioned range of motion is one thing that regularly gets tested. So I'm assuming then that there are range of motion benefits. If it's tested and retested, then we're confirming results that have already been confirmed. Is there increased range of motion through foam rolling? And if so, is there a specific way to do it in order to increase that range of motion?
That's a great question. And this is another one where we've used a couple of different techniques, and one of the things to talk about first will be duration. And it seems to be pretty consistent that rolling between 90 and 120 seconds seems to give you the best bang for your buck, so to speak. And this was recently confirmed in a 2020 publication where it was a review to where they just looked at all the different studies that have been published, and that number keeps coming up, 90 to 120 seconds on a particular muscle group. One of the things I will add about that, though, is I'm not aware of studies that have really specifically compared different durations over a length of time. Like if we just look at, rolling for 30 seconds, 6 days a week, is that any better than 60 seconds, 6 days a week? I haven't really seen studies that do a direct comparison of duration. It just seems that 90 to 120 seconds is the most commonly used. The other thing that we've studied, Scott and I've studied, is the use of active motions during rolling. So it's pretty common to just roll up and down the length of the muscle. And as we teach at NASM, we want to find a tender spot and hold. And after that, we could then do some rolling to kind of push some fluid and stuff through there. But what we've also done in our studies is added in, again, like an active motion. So we investigated rolling the quadriceps, and what we would do is stop about halfway. So we just needed to standardize the process. We would stop halfway down the thigh, and then we would do 4 knee bends. So activating the hamstring to pull the knee through knee flexion. And we found again that increased range of motion just slightly better than just the rolling up and down. But similar to the texture, rolling up and down does work. And one of the things we've found, both with texture and technique, is the most important thing is not to overcomplicate it for clients. We don't need clients to think that they need this fancy foam roller in order to get benefits. And we also don't need clients to think that they must follow this specific program to get benefits. If you have anything and you do anything on it, it's better than doing nothing.
And when you say better than doing nothing, are we still talking about range of motion, and what other benefits may come from doing this foam rolling technique?
Range of motion is a big one that's been studied quite a bit, as we talked about. The pain pressure threshold, that's another one where we see slightly increased benefit. And what that is it's an immediate reduction in the sensation of discomfort. So to take a muscle that was sore from prior training, or I, of course, hesitate to say an injured, any sort of an injury, we wouldn't necessarily want to roll unless you talk to your physician about it. But if there is any bit of discomfort, rolling will immediately decrease that sensation of discomfort. It appears to be temporary, but what I would encourage clients to do is once we get that reduction of discomfort, then we can move into our other types of stretching techniques. We can move into some sort of a movement pattern to engage the muscles and to get things to moving, which will have a longer lasting reduction in discomfort, if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me because I've been really sore. And the worst thing you want to do when you're really sore is lie down on top of a foam roller and roll around. So it's painful. But I tell people it's like you take all the pain that you would have over the next few hours, like 3 hours maybe, and you condense it into a 15-minute awful foam rolling session. But then for the next 3 hours or so, it's like, hey, not so bad. This is not so bad. I'm not so sore after all. But you did say it is temporary, and I agree with that too, just anecdotally, right? So after a big leg workout, the foam roll, 2 days later, usually the second day soreness, really painful. You can get the pain to be mitigated quite a bit, but after a few hours, it does come back. But then again, for me, after a few hours, because I happen to work in a gym, I happen to have foam rollers at my house, then it's easy enough for me to get back down on the ground, roll out my quads, roll out my hips, roll out my calves, and to kind of go back through that process again of, oh, this really hurts because they're really sore muscles. And now I can walk around and feel much more comfortable because I'm not in nearly as much pain through that DOMS as I would normally be without foam.
One of the way Tom Myers from Anatomy Trains has explained it to me when I was having a discussion with him. He said, the pain is already there. We're extracting it. We're bringing the pain out. We're not inducing the pain. We're pulling it out. Which I don't know if I completely agree with that, but it sounds great.
Good. While we're on the anecdotal topics, let's just keep going.
One of the other interesting things that just came out in a study published this year was the use of foam rollers as a recovery technique, and they found that it would reduce pro-inflammatory proteins and it would increase anti-inflammatory proteins in muscles that were induced with muscle soreness. So that's one of the first studies to actually look at the molecular level of what can happen by using foam rolling. So incredibly interesting. The other thing with this is it was done on rats, and this is one of the first studies I know of that has used a laboratory animal like a rat for foam rolling. So I wanted to try to learn, well, how in the world do you get a rat to foam roll? And they would, they gave it an anesthesia. So that makes me believe that it was probably asleep. And they applied pressure. So they manually rolled out the rat's quadricep. They applied pressure, and it was up to 25% of the rat's body weight. And I think it's incredibly interesting a study, the methods are really the setup, the design of that, I think is interesting. The findings are excellent because that's one of the first ones where we're looking at these pro and anti-inflammatory proteins. But when humans roll, they're typically conscious and they're active in that rolling process. So we have to wonder, as great as these findings are, not quite sure if we can generalize them to human subjects, but it's interesting nonetheless as using foam rolling as a recovery technique.
Yeah, even if you found somebody sleeping and tried to foam roll them, they would wake up really fast.
Yeah.
I find this a fascinating study. It's also interesting how we do so many rat studies in research in general, a lot of times through medications and things like that. There's no good transfer from rats to humans. So I find it interesting how what we really do is we can test an idea on another creature and just see if that creature gets benefits or detriments from whatever the intervention is. And if they get benefits, then we can start laying the groundwork for a human case. And then there's the institutional review board that looks at it. And what they want to know, is this safe for subjects, for human patients to be a part of? And so sometimes people don't realize the intricacies of research studies and the amount of hoops that you have to jump through, the getting people to be involved. One of the issues that we have in general with a lot of studies is that they're limited to the semester and they're done on college-aged individuals. So with that being said, Kyle, do we have any information, any empirical research on what would generally be an older population for foam rolling, whether it's, just not the typical 18 to 25-year-old college student, but an older population, and can it be anywhere beyond those numbers?
Not to my knowledge. I really don't think we do. I know there's been some, Dr. Cheatham and I have talked about how we would go about setting something like that up. And honestly, I've not searched PubMed for rolling in older individuals anytime recently, but to my knowledge, nothing has been done. And to your point, that means that most of them are on healthy college-age students that typically need extra credit. So their motivation for participating is also different than an average gym goer's motivation.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you think will be the next steps? Do you think that research will ever come about? I mean, I'm not trying to put you or Scott on the spot here. Whether it's you or another group, trying to find a way to see what that looks like and see if there are any variations between the populations and older.
Yes, I think it has to be. We have to start studying this specific population that all the different populations to see how this affects everybody. Now, we have looked at differences between men and women, and we see that the differences there are negligible. So if we're looking at age comparable, male and female, we know that the findings of one will transfer well to the other. But other than that, that's the only thing we've looked at with differences in population. We have to start looking at age. What I'm really concerned, I don't know if concern is the right word, but with COVID, with the pandemic, a lot of labs are completely shut down. So what I'm wondering, is there going to be more animal research on foam rolling? Because labs may have access to that versus college students. But then B, starting to get outside of the university and put together studies, especially of a high risk population. Like, who knows whenever we're going to be able to do that.
Oh, all right. Yeah, this is really interesting. All right. So, and I agree. We've got to pare this down to the specific populations. And if you look at research, they always seem to be so limited in scope, right? Like you're studying this minutia, and that's the purpose of it. You want to know what this population, what this group, and what this sport, and what this, so that you all have your populations, and then you can get a systematic review, you can get a meta-analysis, you can get a literature review, and they can compile all that information and start to be the cipher for what it all means across the board for individuals, and that's valuable. That needs to be the case.
And one of the things that Scott was very adamant about whenever he and I started working together was that we don't necessarily know enough about why foam rolling works to really start going down a lot of these different branches. The first thing we need is established methods. We have to figure out which methods are going to work the best, and whether that's on a college age population or whatever. Getting enough research out there, using these methods, repeating these methods, getting other researchers to start to use the same techniques that we were using, it's very important in trying to build an actual practice or a technique. And once we figure out the techniques, then it's figuring out the frequency, figuring out the duration, and then going as far as to figure out really the mechanisms of why it works. We have two theories that I know we've talked about quite a bit, you and I have on this, but I think Scott's also talked about it. We have these two theories of mechanisms, but beyond that, we really don't know why it works. And so before we just start going into all these different populations, we really need to establish those protocols that we can then repeat on the different populations.
So you've got this repeating idea that you want to take place, these protocols that you're going to put in place. You mentioned that there are two general things. If my memory serves me correctly, there's going to be a neurological component that helps to provide whatever results foam rolling is, and then there's a mechanical component. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yes.
So we've got these two ideas that we believe to be the case. I'd like to see certainly what that might look like, but here's one of the things that's really happening is that we don't understand what's happening. We understand that something is happening. We understand an outcome, but we just don't understand the mechanisms or the process necessarily that takes place. And for all intents and purposes, for the majority of personal trainers out there, a sliding filament theory is interesting to learn, but it may not make you a better trainer whatsoever. I just know the outcomes of muscle contraction or muscle lengthening, muscle shortening, this eccentric, isometric, concentric concept, and I can play with those. Now, whatever's happening with the actin and myosin and the cross-bridging and all that, fascinating, interesting, but practical applications. So this is what I want to get to with you, because do I want to know what the physiological outcomes are and the reasons and rationales? Yes. But what I really want to understand, or what I want our people that are listening to understand, is as a practical application, why do you do foam rolling? When do you do foam rolling? Do you do it before exercise? Do you do it after exercise? Do you do it on the days that you don't exercise? Do you do it on the days like I was talking about, that second day soreness where my legs just hurt just to touch, just to rub the fingertips across the quads? That's how sore I might be. And then you want me to put my body on a foam roller and roll it? Like, is that contraindicated? So what are the practical applications for this self-myofascial rolling, and how do we as trainers make this work for us and our clients?
One of the first things I want to say about that, if we look at technique, and let's go back a little bit and talk about texture, type of roller, density of roller, the most effective roller is the one that the client will use. So that's something to always consider, is regardless of the research, you need to have a roller that the client is actually going to use. The most effective program, the most effective technique is the one the client will repeat. So while we have these times that are a little bit better than other times to roll, we know that making it a bit of an active process versus a passive process, so the client is actively engaged, we know that's better than them just laying there, arbitrarily rolling. But again, we need the client to do it. So if the client would rather just kind of roll around, as long as they're doing it safely on a swimming pool noodle, then that's the best program for your client. To go beyond, so if we go to the client or to the trainer that really wants to know that practical application, looking at when to roll, we know it's beneficial both before and after exercise. Before exercise, you're going to increase fluid flow. You're going to get the tissues moving. Whenever we sit, I can see myself here as I see my shoulders are up and I have this terrible posture. Whenever we sit like that for too long, the tissues just literally get stuck. They just stick together. You look at mechanotransduction, we don't have to go through what that is, but whenever tissues don't move for hours upon hours or days upon days, it actually lays down fibers in between that. And before exercise, for a client that sits like I do, using that roller to just move tissue, so it's just, you're applying pressure, you're just moving the muscles around a little bit. I'm sure those of you that have rolled, you've probably been rolling I feel it quite a bit on the lat or maybe on the quads. You may feel muscle kind of flap over, kind of move around. Well, that's that mechanical piece of just moving stuff. And doing that, getting blood flow, fluid flow, getting the muscles to move, it's almost like a little tissue mobilization technique prior to exercise is an excellent warm-up. Again, if you want to try to get full hip extension in whatever you're doing for your workout, but your hips are just stuck, the hip flexors are short and tight, and those tissues are just jammed together, spending a few minutes to get that to moving is going to allow you to get better hip extension. You'll get better glute activation. You'll get better range of motion. Your performance will increase. So it's great to do prior to exercise. We would ideally select muscles that you found being problematic. I'll just use that term with a movement assessment. That's what we would focus our rolling on, muscles that are short or overactive. So that way we know that we're going to improve, overall movement patterns, which leads to better exercise. However, if you have a client that for whatever reason you don't know which muscles may be short, if they did not perform a movement assessment, you can just select major muscles, calves, quads, glutes, getting some movement in the thoracic spine. Those are excellent areas to target on a regular basis. If you don't know specifically which muscles need to be rolled, targeting those areas, calves, quads, glutes, thoracic spine, is going to get great results. They'll move better, they'll feel better. And that's also whenever we'd really want to get those active motions in. Since we're about to do an active exercise, getting some knee flexions. If you're rolling the lats, we teach getting some arm sweeps. So that type of stuff to get that movement in the tissues is going to be ideal. Post-exercise, we know that, like we just talked about, at least on the rats, rolling could play a role in those pro and anti-inflammatory proteins. So if we want to take that into account, we can say that. But we also know that rolling the muscles that have worked the hardest, again, is going to flush some of that fluid out, that metabolic waste that will allow some fresh fluid and nutrients to come into the tissues. It doesn't completely eliminate soreness, but we do know that it speeds up that recovery process. So whenever soreness would peak, let's say it peaked at 2 days, if you foam roll, it's more likely to peak at 1 day, which means you'll then get into that recovery, or you did start that recovery process a bit sooner. Post-exercise, I would teach rolling as being more of a fluid rolling type of a movement. Think of it as, again, just flushing fluid, moving fluid through the body. If you find an area that's extra tender as you're doing that, stop, hold pressure, breathe, relax. We really don't ever want to overexcite the muscle by if we find a tender spot and just rolling really quickly. We want to relax on it, but your post-rolling technique should be a little bit more of that fluid type of a movement. And whenever we look at frequency, you can foam roll every day. Now, if there's bruising or something, yes, you probably want to allow that to heal. If you're extra sore, I would try to get a handheld roller and apply pressure. Let's say your quads, handheld roller, so you can get some lighter pressure, but you're still getting that movement to get stuff to moving, and then you can eventually work up to that body weight pressure. So you can roll every day. Some of the studies look at about 3 times a week as being effective if you can't roll every day. And I forgot if you asked more questions.
I did. Well, also we're looking at long-term effects, right? So, if I stretch 3 or 4 times a week, I can increase range of motion and then it's done. But oftentimes if I stop stretching, I lose that range of motion. Is it the same thing with foam rolling? Am I changing the tissue enough if I do it for a prolonged period of time that it maintains these prolonged benefits, like I'm less sensitive to pain in general, or I have increased range of motion in general. And if I stop, how long do I stop before I lose those benefits?
I can't answer the last part of the question. How long does it take for the benefits to reverse? However, if we're looking at foam rolling as part of an overall program, it should be part of an overall program. You should be doing other things. So if you have tight calves, short calves. Well, it's not just rolling. We want to roll. We want to statically stretch. We want to add in some dynamic movements. If you have the corrective exercise specialization, then we know that we probably need to activate muscles on the other side of the joint, so the anterior tibialis, something that's going to help keep that the ankle joint a bit more balanced out. If you're following all of those steps, you shouldn't have to foam roll for forever. There's more to that, I guess. We look at nutrition. We look at what you spend your day doing. Being dehydrated it's really tough to get long-term benefits with dehydrated tissue. Like, you can see some immediate changes, but it doesn't last very long. So you have to look at your hydration. You have to look at your nutrition, what you're doing throughout the day. We could have world's most perfect corrective program. You could be rolling right. You could be doing everything right. But then if you spend 15 hours a day hunched over a computer, it's really tough to see those long-lasting benefits. So there's a lot that goes into it. In a perfect world, we should see permanent changes because we're following the right program, we're doing the right things outside of the gym, and we're giving our body what it needs in order to repair and recover the way it should.
Okay, I like that. Well, I'm gonna hit you with something else. You're probably familiar with the work of Travell and Simmons and the volumes that they've written 50 years ago on trigger points and trigger point therapy. And they found oftentimes that the trigger points were in weak muscles, so these underactive muscles. Now, when we look at it, we're not looking for trigger points technically, we're looking for tender areas.
Yeah.
We tend to look at these areas in overactive muscles. Has there been any research done on foam rolling the weaker muscles to see if there are any outcomes on that?
I don't think they were ever really approached from that perspective. Whenever we say weaker, there's been quite a few studies on using foam rolling on the hamstrings, and similar to static stretching of the hamstrings, it's an easier setup. It's an easier position to control. So there's been quite a bit of that. We know the hamstrings to typically be lengthened. However, they can also be overactive, so they're one of those types of funny muscles. The research on that, nothing in the way of trigger points that I can recall. It's just going back to looking at range of motion. There's been some looking at activation of the antagonist, so they'd roll the hamstrings and look to see if there was increased or decreased activation of the quadriceps. So I don't think there's been anything to really look at that, at the weaker side of the joint and foam rolling. To your point on the trigger points, oftentimes, trigger points are found in muscles that sustain low-level contractions over a long period of time. So it's almost like the body puts down a trigger point in this muscle that is maintaining this contraction as a way to conserve energy. So our body wants to not burn calories. And if you have a muscle that is lengthened, the upper traps are very common to this. You have a muscle that is lengthened because of this poor posture. Well, that muscle is having to contract to maintain that position. And whenever you do that for too long, the body could just put a trigger point there to help maintain that contraction. So it's very often that we find trigger points in those lengthened and underactive muscles. We should, if we identify those, or if a trigger point therapist has identified those, we should use a roller to have, or some sort of a device to hold sustained pressure on that tender spot, whether it's a trigger point or not. Even though it's a underactive, we would still make pressure to try to reduce that tenderness, and that should improve the muscle's ability to contract. But going to the research, I don't know that any research has been done on that, just more anecdotal from my own experience.
All right, so I want to ask one more question, and then I'd like to open this up a little bit earlier than we normally do for people who are watching the Facebook live stream, so that they can ask questions, because this tends to be a hot topic and people like to inquire about what's going on, and they want to ask their questions. And these are the moments where you get my client questions. I have a client, they want to know for themselves. So with that being said, let me ask one more question, and then we'll get to our producer, Greg, and have him reach out and talk to some of the people that are in the feed. But here's my question. You mentioned that there's a decreased, there tends to be in this recent study, decreased inflammatory markers and increased anti-inflammatory markers from foam rolling, which I find fascinating. I love just how this works. I don't understand it, but I think it's fascinating. Do we know if that happens, if foam rolling helps with anything else? Like, does it assist with blood sugar or triglycerides? Does it assist with muscle strengthening? Does it assist with brain activity or endorphins? You know, are there things that go on in the body that we're starting to look at with foam rolling and be like, oh, well, that's a nice little twist. That's interesting.
That's a really good question. So you mentioned strengthening. I know there was a recent study or a 2020 publication where they didn't look at strengthening, but they did look at power and agility, and they saw that foam rolling compared to the non-foam rolling group, improvements in flexibility, power, and agility. So that could maybe translate to, if we're increasing power, if we're increasing agility, then we're getting improved neuromuscular function some way. So that may relate to an improvement in strength. Looking at things like endorphins or brain health or cognitive function, I can't think of anything right now at the top of my head. However, I like trying to come up with my own theories, although that may not be the most scientific thing to do. But what I would say is, if you are moving better and feeling better, you're going to have improved function. You're going to have improved endorphin release. That's just how we work. We have a brain to move. I'm sure you're familiar with the story of the sea squirt. Does everybody know about you've heard about the story of the sea squirt? So the sea squirt, it just has a brain and nervous system, and what's a brain and a spinal cord? I can't really remember the story, but anyway, it tries to search around for reef, and once it embeds on reef, it basically just digests its own brain. Our brain, we have the brain we have because of movement. So if we're using a roller to make it easier to move, to make moving feel better, is inevitably going to improve cognitive health, brain health, pretty much every aspect of your life. Now, the research to back that up is not there yet. I'm sure someday it will be. They're trying to look at any other things that are related to that. I can't think of it right now. There's been some stuff on lactate. So there was a 2020 publication where they looked at active recovery compared to neuromuscular stimulation compared to foam rolling. And they found that all three of those had similar effects on blood lactate removal and performance recovery, delayed onset muscle soreness. So there's some things there. I can't really go into, I don't know the details behind that, but there's looking at some of that, there's some stuff there.
I find it interesting that we use our big brains and we develop these brains in order to ambulate, to move, to find food. And then now that they're big developed brains, we use them as much as we can to figure out how to move less, how to make things simpler, how to make things easier, and how to not engage. It's nice to have the fitness industry here and the research within fitness didn't really exist very much. There was some physiology, but it wasn't even until in recent decades that there was exercise physiology that was really being studied. So this is fascinating to me, the amount of research that's come out in fitness and wellness and health regarding movement in such a short period of time relative to studies that have been coming out. All right, so with that said, let's reach out. I'm going to go over to our producer, Greg. So Greg Esposito, nice to have you with us here, sir. Is there any activity going on in the chat there?
morning. Glad or this afternoon, depending on where you are. Glad to have everybody with us. And first question comes to us from Mayor. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but she wants to know if you could speak to self-myofascial release for chronic pain, specifically muscle and TP pain. She says she's found it invaluable for herself over the years.
I don't know if I can really say anything specifically. Using it, we need to, working with clients with pain, we always need to exercise caution. Speak with their physicians, make sure that somebody knows what you're doing and knows that you're going to use foam rolling, or that there is an understanding for the underlying cause of the pain. We don't want to use foam rolling in attempt to treat pain. Now, if there is a condition causing it, and we're using the foam roller as a point to ease some discomfort, then that works perfectly fine. I would encourage those clients with chronic pain to start off with a soft roller. Like we were saying earlier, it's only going to be effective if you will do it. So find the softest roller you can find. Make sure you're in a comfortable position. Roll slowly. You don't have to roll at all. You can just lay your leg over top of the roller, hold it there for 30 seconds, and then move up and hold. So it can work very, very well for a lot of different conditions. It depends on the person. It's something that the person is open to, being open-minded about it. Are they willing to give it a try? And starting slow and, slowly working up. One of the most important things really with all clients is, can they apply pressure, breathe, and relax? And if they can do that, then it's an effective tool. If it induces too much pain to where they're holding their breath, they're not able to relax, then it's probably not the right thing for that person at that time.
What else, Greg?
All right. We have Allison in the chat, and she wants to know if someone has chronic trigger point tight muscles, does it help to apply heat before foam rolling?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say is that an answer? There's nothing wrong with applying heat before foam rolling. I can't think of any reason or any study right now that has really shown the benefits of that. I have used heated rollers in the past, which feel wonderful. One of the things with the heated rollers, though, is whenever the heat is continuously moving, it doesn't ever really penetrate to the level of the muscle. So then it ends up just being like tactile stimulation, which does induce a response, which is fine. So the heated rollers feel great. I don't really necessarily know that they are more effective. I would, go back to the other answer to the question, the answer to the other question. If the person enjoys that, if they feel better, if you do heat and then rolling, then that is the most effective thing for them. If it works, continue to use it. I can't think of any scientific support for or against it, though. Rick, you being a manual therapist for many years, what do you think about before body work? That works well.
I think it worked well. And again, this is really anecdotal, but when we do know that from stretching research that if you have a heated muscle and you stretch that muscle increases range of motion. So it may be similar. I'm interested also in the flip side of that. So I know that there are these cryo rollers. They're rollers that are, you can fill them with water, I guess, and put them in the freezer, or you can use these cold rollers. Do you have any information about that?
I do. The company I worked for, we made a cold roller that was, people loved it, but it wasn't incredibly profitable because it costs a lot to make. Almost the same thing with whenever you cold, the cold is rolling up and down. It's not maintained long enough to penetrate to the level of the muscle and really do anything there. But cold on the skin, which we know immediately changes the perception of that area. So if you apply cold, we know the pain gate theory. You apply cold, the body's going to sort of resonate with that cold more than the pressure. So you could potentially apply more pressure in the presence of cold, because the body's not really recognizing the pressure, if that makes sense. I know you understand the pain gate theory, so hopefully I'm explaining it in a way that participants, listeners may understand. But it's the same with foam rolling. The vibrating rollers. Vibrating rollers do the same thing. Cold and vibration, in my opinion, I don't have research to compare this. What I've seen anecdotally using both, they basically the same sort of a response.
It's more of an analgesic effect, possibly, that you might get this additional benefit.
What was the first part of that?
Analgesic effect.
Yeah.
So it's like a pain reduction effect that allows you to apply more pressure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the vibrating is probably more effective than the cold, but I think they both kind of had a little bit of a that pain reduction effect.
Gotcha. All right, Greg, are there any other questions from the people?
Can I say one more thing, actually? The previous question there, I think my main concern, again, that sounds really serious, but the question started off talking about chronic tightness. I think I would want to know why there's chronic tightness. Like what is, just, for the listener, make sure you do an assessment where the rolling and the stretching to the muscles that actually need it. Because if a muscle is chronically tight and it's chronically tight, I would think that you're maybe missing something. You're maybe trying to apply the techniques to the wrong muscle, or go back to the assessments, take a look at that, and let's see if there is a reason why we're having that chronic tightness.
All right, Greg, what's next?
Yeah, we have two more from the listeners today. Ryan wants to know, with CES, inhibiting is the first part of the continuum. How would you be able to create a corrective exercise program for someone who has a contraindication to self-myofascial release / foam rolling?
That's an excellent question. So two things. First, foam rolling works great, but if the client can't do it, or sometimes clients just don't want to do it, that's okay. We can go right into the lengthening aspect of it. So we can go right into static stretching. Applying the foam rolling will get you quicker results, but static stretching, then to activation, then to integration will still work. It may just take a little bit longer. The other part is we need to remember that foam rolling or self-myofascial release comes from massage. So at the end of the day, the client really needs it. If they're not seeing the results without it, then I would refer them out to a massage therapist. And it's difficult to try to get massage right before each training session, I know, but that massage can take the place of foam rolling.
All right. That's also pretty expensive. So let's massage. Let's do a training session. Now I'm exhausted, so maybe another massage again. It just adds up. All right. So what's the next one, Greg?
Yeah, last one here is from Alonzo, and he wants to know, is it better to roll or hold on specific spots?
That's a great question. I think it depends. It depends on what we identified from the movement assessments. If we identified a muscle as being mechanically shortened, so if it's limiting range of motion, short and tight, holding pressure is going to induce a nervous system response. So that's kind of that first part of what we were talking about earlier. There's two different theories. Holding pressure is going to excite the nervous system in a specific way to sort of reduce tension in that muscle. But then I would follow that up with some movement. So we could roll through there, either rolling along the same lines as the muscle fiber, or like I was talking about earlier, adding in some active motions. So if you identify the calves as being short and overactive, start at the bottom. I like starting at the bottom of the muscle. You'd slowly roll up. If you find a tender spot, you stop and hold for 20, 30, 60 seconds. And then after that, go through dorsiflexions to try to get some lengthening into the muscle. That's also going to activate that antagonist, which will, further play into the nervous system response. You can also do something, shaking the legs side to side to get some little cross frictions. Again, just moving the tissues around. So hold pressure and then move. If you're working with, let's say you have a clients in the anterior pelvic, we've identified the hamstrings as being lengthened, but we know that hamstrings can be funny to where they're lengthened and overactive. That could be another great opportunity to hold sustained pressure onto that to help reduce the tension. One of the differences between a short muscle and a long muscle is after rolling the short muscle, then we'd want to stretch it. After rolling a long muscle, we would not want to stretch it. We would just want to reduce that tension and then move on to the other part of the program.
Excellent. Well said, because that does put what we're talking about specifically here, which would be foam rolling followed by static stretching. Static stretching is a corrective modality. It's a corrective form of flexibility. So if there's nothing to correct, then there's no reason to make that application. However, throughout the OPT model, throughout every single phase that you could go through and every single level of the model, foam rolling is indicated. It's in corrective, it is in stabilization, it's in strength, max strength, and it's in power. And now it seems, based off of one of the research that you spoke about, that it's not just in power, but it's highly indicated in power outcomes. So thank you so much, because I have learned a lot by listening to you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, man. Well, it's always a pleasure, and I'm grateful to have you here. Are there any things that you think, to close out this conversation, that our trainers should be aware of?
I would encourage people to start off easy on the foam rolling. I think we're all really quick to try to buy these fancy looking rollers, these intense looking rollers. And I don't know if it's really, I don't want to necessarily use the word to try to impress clients, but we put them on the roller sometimes and like, do you see how bad that hurts? You better make sure you do this so that way it doesn't hurt so bad. And I want to encourage all fitness professionals to not go down that path or not use that approach with any type of body work. Start as soft as you possibly can. And I encourage people to stay softer with their foam rollers. We don't need to use this as an opportunity to try to beat people up. Get you a couple of soft rollers. You can have another a little bit more medium dense rollers with the texture on it, so that way a client can progress up to it. But don't use foam rolling. As soon as they walk in the door, we put them on something that induces this pain response. We want to stay away from that. We have a tough enough time getting people to come into the gym. They should enjoy foam rolling. So start easy, start soft, have it be an opportunity where your client just sort of relaxes for a few minutes. They get ready for their exercise, both physically and mentally, by just breathing, relaxing, and preparing.
What are some of the ways that people can do foam rolling if they don't have some of these softer foam rollers? Are there techniques that people can do in order to offset some of the pressure?
If they don't have any sort of a roller?
No, if they don't have the softer version, are there techniques that can be applied?
Yeah, so if all you have are harder rollers, so I know at a couple of gyms, they maybe only buy the black roller, a little bit more medium or high density. If you put a couple of them together, so I know a lot of times the IT band, as an example, can be a really, really tender. And as a side note there, understand we're really trying to address the vastus lateralis underneath the IT band. And even if you have the soft rollers, taking two of them, setting them side by side, it displaces that pressure and it can make it much more convenient. If you don't have any sort of a roller, using self-applied techniques, the body weight pressure usually makes it a little bit easier to sort of relax. But if you don't have anything, take the heel of your hand to hold pressure into your palm. And just doing that and sort of moving around, or even gripping it and massaging it a little bit, that type of stuff can work really, really well. I like I said, the body weight pressure from the roller kind of makes it a little bit easier to relax and breathe into it, other than when you're trying to push. But if you don't have anything, self-applied pressure works very well.
All right, and then one more thing before I let you go. You were talking about the difference between increased pressure and decreased pressure, and that being a comfort thing. Do we have studies? Is there research that have been done on this one hurts and this one doesn't hurt quite as bad or nearly as bad, and we still get similar outcomes?
Yeah, we Scott and I published again. I think it was 2019, maybe the end of 2018, where we looked at 3 different densities of rollers, and we found that the medium density. And as far as quantifying the density, I can't tell you right now what the difference in densities were, but what we identified as a medium density roller was the most effective. That was closely followed by the light density, the softer roller, and the worst effects came from the harder roller. And these were college age athletes. And what we found was just by talking to them, this is one reason we should always add a qualitative component to quantitative studies. Just by talking to them, they're like, it just hurts too bad. I can't relax whenever I'm trying to roll my quad. So that's something to take into consideration as well. A big part of this with the rollers is personal preference. Find a roller that your client likes. Have a variety of them if you can, and let them pick and choose and see. We also found that color makes a difference. The color of roller makes somebody rate it as being more dense than what it really is. So that's something to take into consideration as well.
All right. Well, I like this. I like that it doesn't have to be as painful. I think one of the things that people do oftentimes is they put themselves in a position to show. I have this happen a lot of times doing workshops where people, let's say we're doing the vastus lateralis, and people will lie down on the foam roller and they'll add both legs on top of the foam roller. They're holding their whole body weight on top of this, pushing into their thigh. And I'm thinking, there's no way you're relaxing into that. Yeah. It's so much pressure. It's so much weight. It's so much tension that you're actually contracting the muscle rather than relaxing the muscle. Do you think that that's probably why that harder foam roller was the reason they weren't getting as good of results?
Absolutely. Yeah. While they were trying to roll, they were tense against it. So they were probably, activating the muscle the entire time, just like you're saying, because whenever we relax and that muscle actually gets in there, or I'm sorry, the roller would actually get in there, it would probably just hurt too bad. Or the other thing to remember, or the other thing I would add is if the person keeps adding more and more pressure, they're trying to get a harder and harder roller, they don't need to roll. They're beyond that. They're fine. That's not something, if they enjoy it, that's one thing. But as far as continuing to see results by applying more and more and more pressure, like eventually we reach a point to where you graduated from foam rolling land. You can move on.
Very well. Thank you so much. Dr. Kyle Stoll, I appreciate your time, your expertise, and the research that you've put into this. And thank you for sharing that with us. Do you have any contact information if people want to find you, reach out to you, email you, social, whatever?
Yes. I'm not very good at what my handles are, but you can find me on Facebook, just Kyle Stoll, and it's a face that looks similar to this one. Email address, you're more than welcome to contact me at my NASM email. So it's Kyle, Kyle, .Stoll, STULL @NASM.org. I enjoy the questions. I enjoy these conversations. So anybody out there listening, if you have questions, shoot them over. I'm happy to answer them as best as I can. And Dr. Rick Richey, thank you very much for your time and having me on here again. I really enjoyed it.
It's always a pleasure to have you on, and look forward to when we can actually see each other face to face again. So,
you too, sir.
Yeah, thank you. An absolute pleasure. And for you guys, thank you so much. A lot of you have reached out to me, so please continue to do so. Rick.Richey, RICHEY, NASM.org, or you can hit me up on Instagram, where I'm most active at dr.rickrichey, and I'd be happy to engage and interact with you. Appreciate all of you for being listeners, and look forward to what we have coming down the pipe. You've been listening to the NASM CPT podcast.